We'll probably stop recording when we start the Q&A, so you should feel free at that point to like ask your questions or really engage, without kind of being like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be recorded. But we're going to record the first part of the presentation. And as you can tell, this isn't sort of like a typical, it's not like a webinar. We're just here in this meeting. We're all equals. I think a lot of us have probably done Zoom before, where you can like mute and unmute yourself. We're going to request that you use that power sparingly. I mean, if you've got something like really urgent that you really need to say, go ahead and unmute yourself. Otherwise, questions and stuff like that would be great if you would put those in the chat. We will be monitoring them, and there is part of the program where we're going to do some Q&A stuff. So we hope to address everybody's questions and concerns and needs. So what's the goal of tonight's program? We obviously we're here to convince you to vote no on Proposition 36. We think that maybe some of you are already kind of on board with that, but if you're not, then we're glad you're here, and we want to tell you the reasons why we think Proposition 36 is a bad proposition and why people should vote no. You might already be on board with that, and even if you're not on board yet, if you come on board, we want to also give you sort of tools for what to do next, because we definitely think this is going to be a hard-fought battle, and we're looking for people to take action in any way that they can and feel comfortable. And so we want to tell you what those actions are, and then also kind of give you some talking points or some things that you might be able to use in conversations with your coworkers or your neighbors. So to that end, we've got a couple of really excellent panelists with us tonight. And I'll introduce them in a second, but I want to point out Denise Ellerick, who is also on the Santa Cruz chapter of the ACLU board. And then we've got Pam Sexton and Julia, Julia, I'm going to blow your last name.
Grattan.
Thank you. With us from Surge. And so this is, like I said, a collaboration between the ACLU and Surge. And then our panelists tonight are Tammy Kresnar, who is the senior organizer at the ACLU of Northern California. So she's up in the Bay Area joining us on the Zoom. So in her role as a senior organizer at the ACLU of Northern California, she engages volunteers and activists in building political power through management of ACLU NorCal's chapter program. So ACLU chapters, like our program here in Santa Cruz, we do organizing and advocacy on local issues. So like Tammy's our point person for a lot of that. And she has more than a decade of experience in political advocacy, community organizing, and working in partnership with volunteer activists to win campaigns and affect meaningful change in their communities. We're also joined by Heather Rogers, who has been a public defender for over 20 years in the state and federal courts. Heather has handled cases at every stage of litigation, from arraignment through trial and appeal. She has represented clients accused of offenses from delinquency to homicide, defended detainees incarcerated at Guantanamo Naval Base in Guantanamo, Cuba, and argued cases in California's appellate court and the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. Heather is honored to serve as the first public defender of Santa Cruz County, her birthplace and home. Before her appointment, Heather served as a public defender at the defense firm that previously provided public defense services for Santa Cruz County. She's a faculty member of the National Criminal Defense College, lecturer in legal studies at the University of California, Santa Cruz, and frequent trainer at regional and national trial skills programs. Heather has also taught at California Western School of Law and Monterey College of Law. She clerked for the Honorable M. Margaret McEwen on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals before starting her career in public defense at Federal Defenders of San Diego, Inc. Heather also served as a public defender in Monterey County and as the federal public defender for the Northern District of California before coming home to Santa Cruz. Heather serves on numerous boards, commissions, and committees dedicated to elevating public defense, training public defenders, and advocating for her clients' rights to equity, housing, and holistic representation. Heather has an AB in English Language and Literature from the University of Chicago, and a JD from Stanford Law School. Heather lives in the Santa Cruz Mountains with her husband, Eben, a local therapist, and her daughters, ages 9 and 16. In her free time, Heather enjoys traveling, hiking, and snowboarding. So welcome to our panelists, and we're glad that everybody's here. Like I said, we're going to start with kind of an overview of what Proposition 36 is and why we think it's a bad deal. And so for that, I'm going to turn this over to Tammy Kresnar.
Thank you. Thank you, Stacy. Thanks everyone for being here. Let me get myself situated here. Okay, are my slides up here for now? Okay, wonderful. So I have a lot of gratitude to our ACLU Santa Cruz chapter and our folks at Surge and Heather for participating in our panel event tonight. Ballots went out this week, so you likely already have your ballot in your mail. I'm pretty sure I saw mine was supposed to come today, and I haven't checked my mailbox, so that's a good reminder for me. So we have less than a month until the election, so this is sort of the most critical time for us to be talking to you about Proposition 36 and for all of you to be talking to your friends, your neighbors, your coworkers, your family across California who will also be seeing this on their ballots that they should be getting this week. So I'm just going to give sort of a broad sort of overview of Proposition 36, talk a little bit about what it does, give us a little bit of history of how we got here, and talk about the reasons that ACLU, Northern California, and in fact, all the ACLUs across the state are opposing Proposition 36 and really focusing a lot of our energy on it right now. I will recognize like our communities are facing real challenges from homelessness to shoplifting, the skyrocketing cost of living. As Stacy mentioned, I live up in the Bay, I live in Oakland. I live in a neighborhood that is working class. These challenges are very real, very visible, part of my daily life. I had a friend who's came down in a rental car from Sacramento, and she parked her car in front of my house. We woke up the next morning, the car was gone. So I understand like my car's been broken into, things happen, and I understand that for a lot of us, like that is a real situation of where we are in, and it's hard and it's hard to witness. At the same time, I think I do and we all do want my neighborhood, my city to thrive, and if my fellow community members are struggling with homelessness or mental health or the struggle of extreme poverty or substance abuse issues, I want them to be able to get the help that they need and deserve. And Proposition 36 is not the answer to any of those problems. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what Prop 36 would do exactly around theft, sentencing enhancements, and drug use. So first, around theft. Proposition 36 increases prison time for an extremely broad range of theft offenses. Studies show that increasing charges and punishments, including for repeat offenses, does not actually meaningfully deter crime. And Proposition 36 would allow judges to punish someone who commits any of a wide range of misdemeanor and felony theft offenses with a felony if they have 2 or more prior convictions for a theft-related offense. That person could be sentenced for up to 3 years in state prison. The measure also allows prosecutors to add together multiple unrelated misdemeanor level thefts, which are under $950, to arrive at a dollar amount of over $950 in order to charge them as a felony. This could mean that a prosecutor could charge someone by combining entirely unrelated incidents. So you stole a sandwich in January, and then maybe you returned your rental car late in June, and maybe you took some money out of your employer's cash register in December, you could be charged with a felony. And research shows that when the law allows discretion to charge someone with either a misdemeanor or a felony, as Proposition 36 would, people of color more often receive harsher punishments. The second part that I'll talk about are sentencing enhancements, which require judges to add additional years of prison time on top of the sentence for the underlying crime. California's reliance on sentencing enhancements, particularly for nonviolent felonies, has contributed to the mass incarceration of people in prison in our state and to shocking racial disparities. And Proposition 36 adds a mandatory sentencing enhancement if someone, quote unquote, takes, damages, or destroys any property during any felony offense and the damage exceeds $50,000 of value. Proposition 36 does not require this damage to be intentional, meaning, for example, it could apply to property damaged in a car accident. Prop 36 also adds a mandatory sentencing enhancement of up to 3 years when 2 or more people attempt to take, damage, or destroy any property during a felony, regardless of the value or whether it was intentional. And then third, I'll just touch on drug use. Proposition 36 increases prison time for those who use drugs, even though the evidence shows that imprisonment for drug crimes does not reduce drug use. And it allows judges to sentence someone to a felony for possessing any amount of hard drugs if the person had been previously convicted of 2 or more drug-related offenses, including misdemeanor possession. So that's a lot. And I'm sure Heather will go into more detail from her perspective and in working with clients and sort of the context of how that those types of policies will play out locally in Santa Cruz. To take us back for a moment, I wanted to consider how we got here in the first place. So in the early 90s, California, right, was one of the leading carceral states, 3 strikes laws, incredibly punitive enhancements and laws that allowed prosecutors to charge and request higher sentences for people, which directly led to overcrowding in prisons in the 90s, the aughts, and beyond. By the time we got to 2011, prisons had become so massively overcrowded that a case made it all the way to the Supreme Court and found that the prison conditions were so terrible that the court had to threaten California with either reducing the prison population or to implement reforms to reduce the number of people who are incarcerated. That led us into various reforms where we had a window of time that we were able to move some issues forward. That includes things like classifying petty theft under $950 as a misdemeanor. Proposition 57 took away the ability of prosecutors to charge children as adults. And we were able to pass some sentencing laws that safely reduce the number of people who are incarcerated. Coming to 2020, which feels like a lifetime ago and also yesterday, global pandemic hits, right? Destabilizes all of our communities, causes massive disruption over the last several years, and we've seen that play out in public safety in our communities. What we're also seeing now is how organized and strategic the law enforcement lobby has been. Police unions, district attorneys unions, folks who have been opposed to almost every single reform that we have tried to put forward for the last 40 years are simply exploiting the frustrations that people have about public safety. Those frustrations are real, but this is not the answer. They're proposing a so-called solution that will only again lead to mass incarceration, and they're trying to sell a story that every single social ill that we're seeing in our communities can be solved by putting the problem away where we can't see it, by incarcerating folks and making sure that something else is happening out there where we don't have to have it in our communities. So I'm going to touch on 4 critical reasons why statewide the ACLU is opposed to Proposition 36. We're taking action. I'm here at the events like this, speaking with you wonderful folks. We're talking to community members. We're talking to ACLU volunteers and supporters about why it is important that we vote no on Proposition 36 and why it's not just coming to this webinar, although I'm very appreciative that you're here, but it is also talking with your friends, your coworkers, your neighbors across the state about why they need to vote no on 36 as well. So 4 main reasons why the ACLU is opposing. The first are the enormous cost of Proposition 36, while also reducing funding for programs that actually help. California is set to spend a staggering $18 billion, billion with a B, on the criminal legal system this fiscal year. When I read that, I think I knew it, but it is still so astonishing to me to actually say that we were spending $18 billion on the criminal legal system. That does not even include any county or city level spending. Passage of Proposition 36 would add billions more to that number. At the same time, it would also reduce funding for services that are proven to turn people's lives around. Mental health, victim services, drug treatment, job services are funded by the cost savings from shortening the sentences for people convicted of low-level offenses. These are programs that promote accountability and help people actually change their behavior. Over the next 10 years, it would take $750 million from the state's most successful drug treatment and homelessness prevention programs, $300 million from services for survivors of crime, which includes trauma recovery centers, and it would take $10 million from school-based violence prevention programs that make our communities safer. Second, it would have a huge impact on immigrant communities. So for anyone who is not a US citizen, such as someone who's a longtime permanent resident, if you're undocumented, refugee, if you're a DACA recipient, can face life-altering immigration consequences, even for minor criminal convictions. So people will lose their green cards and be barred from nearly every way of fighting a deportation case for simple possession of a drug with 2 or more prior convictions. People would be barred from getting legal status and may lose any legal status they have for petty theft being charged as a felony. Deportation separates families, leaves children without parents, and would be devastating to our immigrant community members. Third, Proposition 36 will make our states and our local communities' homelessness problem worse. People who have spent time in jail or prison are 10 times more likely to be homeless, and people who are unhoused are 11 times more likely to be arrested than people who have a stable home. There are lots of proven solutions that actually work to get a roof over people's heads and save taxpayer dollars, whether that's temporary housing or housing first models like the Housing for a Healthy California program. But simply put, we cannot incarcerate and arrest our way out of homelessness. And then fourth and final point, and then I'll turn it back to Stacy and Heather. Racism is a feature of the criminal legal system, and Proposition 36 will only put more Black and Latinx Californians into jails and prisons. Even though studies show that white people shoplift more, Black people are 3 times more likely to be arrested for retail theft. And as we saw in the war on drugs, increasing penalties for drugs will have devastating consequences on communities of color, even though white people use drugs at the same rate. And by defunding treatment for things like substance abuse issues, Prop 36 will make existing disparities even worse. So it's for these reasons, the staggering costs, reducing funding, the impact on immigrant communities and homelessness, and increasing racial disparities, that ACLU is opposing Prop 36. I understand that people are concerned about safety. I think we all want to live in like safe and stable neighborhoods. And we also know that things like affordable housing, job support, access to mental health and drug treatment actually give us safer and stable neighborhoods. And none of what is in Proposition 36 is doing that.
And the last one is question, if elected, what is your priority?
Peter, I'm muting you. And I'll pass it back to Stacy and Heather.
Great. Wonderful. Well, I'm just going to turn it right over to Heather. The ACLU of Northern California, the ACLU of Southern California, all of the ACLUs in California are opposing this proposition, along with Governor Newsom, the state Democratic Party, Justin Cummings and Sandy Brown locally, for various reasons. And I want to turn it over to Heather to talk about sort of the impact that this will have on Santa Cruz County and the funding of the programs that are already existing here. And so I'm going to turn it over to Heather. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Stacy, and thank you everyone for coming tonight. That house party looks fun, a lot more interesting than my little office tonight. So I want to start us off with a little parlor game, and I am going to throw down the first volley. As you might know, the way this is titled is the Homelessness, Drug Addiction, and Theft Reduction Act. I think we can come up with something better and potentially more truthful. So I am going to put in the chat my nomination for this little game we're going to play tonight. It is the act to mass incarcerate people who are suffering from poverty, houselessness, and mental health and substance use disorders by taking millions of dollars of treatment money from communities like ours to reduce the cost of petty theft from big box billionaires, right? That is what this proposition does. And so mine is too wordy. I'm challenging that house party to come up with something really cool that we can all go chat with our neighbors about. So before I do that, I should clarify that tonight I'm here in my personal capacity as a longtime career public defender, as a concerned community member, and as the mother of two daughters I'm raising here in Santa Cruz County, ages 9 and 16. And in a lifetime of living in and out of this community, I can't tell you how many folks I personally have loved and served and represented who are suffering from housing insecurity or homelessness, substance use, and mental health disorders, and have found themselves involved in the carceral system because of the failure of our social safety nets. And so I speak on really on behalf of all of those people who I have come across in my life and career, who will be at the receiving end of the cages that this proposition promises us. So for every person who we know needs treatment, for every person who we know needs care, this act is going to suggest instead that we put them in jail and prison at our expense. So I've been speaking at a lot of events in the past couple of months. This election has, churned up a lot of things for all of us in this community and for everyone in public defense. One of the conversations I had this week that was really scary for me was at a Get Out the Vote rally on the Santa Cruz Courthouse steps, which was attended like this by so many folks who may arguably be the choir, right? Here we are. I'm looking at all of you, and I know some of you so well, and I know that you're with me on this. But what scared me about this particular conversation was that I thought I was talking to somebody from the choir, and she looked at me and she said, "But Prop 36 is going to give us treatment for people who are suffering from addiction." And I had to take a deep breath before I responded, because that is exactly what Prop 36 isn't doing. There is not a dime for treatment in Prop 36. There is not a cent for treatment in Prop 36. In fact, what Prop 36 does is it takes those millions of dollars that Santa Cruz has been receiving through Prop 47 treatment grants, and it reinvests them back into incarceration. It reinvests them back into disappearing the air quotes problems from our communities. And you know what? Those problems are my neighbors. Those problems are my aunts and uncles, my cousins, my clients, my mom, my dad, my sisters and brothers, who our society has failed with not enough good health care, not enough substance use treatment, not enough, really quality healthcare around mental health, and not enough houses, right? So, as Tammy beautifully said, we cannot police, prosecute, and incarcerate our way out of social safety net failures. But you know what we can do is we can make life easier and cheaper for Walmart, right? And isn't that really why we were put on this planet? To help these big box billionaires not have to deal with somebody shoplifting diapers for their child? They don't want to do that anymore. They don't want to do that. And so rather than have Walmart and Home Depot and Target deal with a shoplift of diapers, we are going to go back a decade to a failed mass carceral state that the United Supreme Court said was cruel and inhumane, right? So I love what we're seeing in the chat. I'm going to lift some of these up. Oh my gosh, you guys are great. I love this choir. You're my people. The Anti-Drug Abuse Act of 1984, repeat. Thank you, Helen. BIPOC, poor, unhoused, mad people rip off the rich or disobey capitalist laws and go live in cages. Correct. The private prison hedge fund bonanza 2024. So our challenge as people who are looking behind the title, looking behind the soundbite, and looking at the folks in our community who have benefited from the Prop 47 treatment funds is to talk to as many people as we can in as many California communities as we can about what this proposition really means, because it is polling well. It is polling well, and it is polling well based on fear-mongering and based on lies, right? So people, our choir don't understand this, right? Folks who show up to the Get Out the Vote rally, you know, waving Kamala Harris signs are like, but this is a good one, right? It's going to give us more treatment. So first of all, I don't want to sit here and preach because I have a tendency to do that and it gets boring. But I do want to share with you a little bit locally about what treatment money has meant for our community. So we opened our doors on July 1st, 2022 with a new community-based whole person defense model that uses holistic representation. And what that means is that my clients have access to social workers and client advocates who work with them to identify and mesh legal and social problems and solve them, right? My advocates, two of my advocates come from a great CBO called Partners for Justice, and they're funded by Prop 47 treatment money. If you could see what these young people are doing in our courtrooms every day, if you could see them go to jail, perform a holistic intake, look at this human being in the eyes and say, what got you here and how can I help you get out? If you could see them on their phones, calling treatment programs, you know, working their cells while they're sitting outside a courtroom to present something to the judge about how a client's done in treatment, they are working tirelessly, right, to really solve the root causes of criminal legal system involvement. And without Prop 47 treatment money, I would not have them. I am not the biggest beneficiary of Prop 47 treatment money here at Public Defender. We get just a fraction of the over $15 million our community has been awarded, most recently to convert sober living environment housing into supportive housing with wraparound services for folks who are suffering from mental health and substance use disorders. You know what solves homelessness? Homes, right? Prop 47 treatment money, those grants are leading to homes, supportive housing, the real antidote, right, to this problem the proposition seeks to solve, right, which it's not doing, of course, at all. We have money from our grant going into the Neighborhood Courts program, which is an amazing collaborative between the Resource Center for Nonviolence, the DA's office, and Public Defender, where we refer people into restorative justice and out of the criminal legal system so that the people who are harmed and the people who do the harm can heal, and our community members sit with them in a circle to talk about what happened and how we can make sure it never happens again, right? So let me give you an example. We had a young man who threw a rock through the window of a business, and that business had been in this family for decades. And the person who was running the business was an elderly gentleman who, you know, really just sobbed and said, I can't pay this insurance premium. I'm going to lose this store. Through restorative justice, that gentleman was face to face with the young man who had thrown that stone as he stumbled out of a bar with some buddies drunk. And together they talked it out, right? The young man said, I'm so sorry. I have a grandpa like you. We have a family business. It never even occurred to me how much this would hurt you. And the gentleman who'd been harmed said, I have a grandson. I don't want to see you go to prison. How can we work this out? And so instead of on-ramping a young person into the criminal legal system, out of college, out of all the things he had dreamed of for his life, instead, he ended up working off the price of that window at this shop and making a lifelong relationship with somebody from our community that he'll draw upon when he goes to get recommendations for his career. And that is what justice looks like. Justice looks like people are healed, right? Our community is uplifted. Justice is not cages. Justice is not handcuffs. Justice is not taking money away from our local programming that is lifting our neighbors up and giving it back to Walmart. That is not justice. I could tell you 1,000 stories. What's heartbreaking for me is that this proposition targets the most vulnerable. It targets the people who are already struggling so severely, and it takes from them the supports, the treatment, and the funding that we have been using to help them lift themselves up. It is a lie, and it is a vicious lie that we need to reveal to everybody who will listen, so that we do not make this terrible mistake of unwinding a decade of progress and filling up our prisons once more with folks who are suffering from poverty and illness, not criminals, right? That's not what this targets at all. So I also just want to tell you, incarceration as a stick that you hold over somebody who's sick has never worked in the history of public defense as I know it. And I've worked in a lot of different systems, right? When you are suffering from a substance use disorder or a co-occurring disorder involving a mental health disorder, someone saying to you, if you don't fix this now, you're going to prison. That is not what fixes it. That is not what fixes it. What fixes it is what we provide here at Public Defender. An interdisciplinary team, including a social worker, a client advocate, an attorney, cheerleaders and supporters who make sure you get to your appointments on time, who hook you up with behavioral health services, who make all of the calls and stand by your side and cheerlead for you to the judge, your smallest successes. Mr. Nelson took a shower this week. Whatever it is, that is what cures people. That is what makes people well, is compassion and care and a courageous standing up for the folks who need us. And Walmart and Target and Home Depot have never had to stand next to somebody in a courtroom and make those pleas for their basic dignity and humanity like my team does every day, right? If you want to know how this will affect our community, come to court on Monday. Come to court tomorrow and see what our advocates are doing. See what people are doing with treatment money. See how we have turned every dime into $1 and stretched it to help as many people as we can in a community that does not have enough treatment beds or enough houses to meet this gaping need, right? So I'm going to just shush for a moment because I really want to hear from you all. And I hope I've persuaded you and that you'll persuade someone else. Thank you so much for your time.
Heather, one thing I wanted to clarify, and it's funny to me that we didn't actually say this at the beginning, because you've talked a little bit about Proposition 47, and I want to make sure that our audience understands the relationship between Prop 36 on the ballot today and Prop 47, which passed in 2014. Because I think, Proposition 47 passed with a lot of support. And so it's funny now that we're in this position of sort of backtracking. And so can we make sure people understand the relationship between those two?
Yeah, and I'll also, rely on y'all to help me with this. But basically, Prop 47 took a lot of theft crimes and drug offenses, and it turned them into misdemeanors, or it decriminalized them, turning them into infractions. It right-sized a system that had led to mass incarceration in California and filled our prisons with people who were sick, really. And so what this does is it rolls back many of the provisions of Prop 47 And the reason why that matters for treatment is that 65% of the money that was saved from that mass carceral state we had 10 years ago when we passed Prop 47 has to go back into local communities for treatment. And that has meant that millions and millions of dollars has been awarded by the BSCC, the California Grant Governing Authority, to communities like ours to fund programs like the ones I've been talking about tonight, right? And so we're the beneficiaries of, I want to say now, over $15 million of this funding in 10 years, which has been absolutely life-changing for the people that I serve. And so while Prop 36 doesn't say, you know, we're going to take that funding stream and block it, that in effect is what it will do, because what's going to happen is it's going to lead to an increase in policing, prosecution, and incarceration. It's going to lead to an increase in defense, right? All these things cost money, and that money is no longer going to be available to fund all of the things that we got out of Prop 47. And so it's expected to cost our local communities tens of millions, maybe even hundreds of millions of dollars, right? Depending on how aggressively these laws are pursued. And that's at the expense of our grant money. It's also at the expense of all of the other things our general fund does. So in our county, here in Santa Cruz County, we have a pot of money that gets split between all of these different deserving folks, you know, public defender, the sheriff, the DA, probation, behavioral health services, all of the different people are really trying to figure out how to make things work on this tiny little pot of money. And what's going to happen is that money that's now going to behavioral health, money that's now going to human services, money that's now going to housing for health, and housing is going to go into the sheriff, the DA, probation. And I'm going to have to ask for more money, because if we increase all of their budgets, I'm going to have more people to defend. So when I took this job, I wanted to work myself out of a job. I want to shrink this office, right? So that it takes just a postage stamp of what we have. I don't want us to need public defenders. But what that means for this community is that we have to de-invest in policing, prosecution, and incarceration. And then we can take all my social workers and client advocates who are doing such phenomenal work and put them into our divisions and our departments where they can continue that work without the threat of prison hanging over our clients' heads.
Thank you for that. So like I said at the beginning of the program, part of what we want to do tonight, I mean, we hope we've convinced you to vote no on Proposition 36, but we're going to need more than just you all. Heather mentioned this, but if you look at the news and the polling, it's a little bit bleak. And so we want to make sure that people have some tools to get involved, to feel empowered to make some changes. And so one of the first things I want to do is share this toolkit that the ACLU has put together. There's sort of some overview and talking points, and then there's a bunch of links to things for social media. You can sign up for updates and action alerts. We hope that some of you will write letters to the editor and talk to your neighbors. And so I want to go ahead and share the link to this toolkit. I'm going to put it in the chat. So we'd love to have you check out the toolkit, get involved, and then you can join some phone banks. You can write, like I said, write a letter to the editor. Even just like talking to your neighbors and coworkers would be great, because I mean, we think that maybe a lot of people haven't had a chance to look at their ballots. Maybe people don't know exactly what they're voting on. There's a lot of misinformation making it sound like Proposition 36 is going to be the solution to all these petty crime problems. And we just know it's not going to be. So you can see Tammy just put in the chat a way to get involved in the phone banks. And so you might end up having conversations with people who, like are going to challenge you about the topic or whatever. And so part of what we want to do with the next part of our program is to create some breakout rooms and do some role playing around what these conversations might look like. So I'm going to turn it over to Julia to explain what we're going to do here.
All right, thank you so much, Tammy and Heather, for your presentations. Just really appreciated those. And yeah, all the information and impact to really have not only in our minds, but also in our hearts. And like Stacy just said, it doesn't just, we don't just all need to individually vote no on this proposition. We really need to be talking to everyone that we can, friends, family, neighbors, coworkers, classmates. And that can be a little bit hard. All of us have different levels of comfort with that. And all of us can practice and get better at that from wherever we are. So we wanted to make some time to practice. So yeah, we'll go into breakout rooms for like 10 minutes or so to talk, have just sort of a role play conversation. And yeah, so like these conversations go all sorts of different ways. A lot of times they may be people who are pretty easy to convince. We know they'll probably be on our side. And it's, and then there's people who we know or maybe not so much. So Pam, do you have that guide for, we put together a few resources for you to have in your breakout rooms, just sort of the overview of what we're doing in case you're a visual person and you've forgotten what I said already. Oh my goodness. I'm also looking at the chat and Sandy is chasing a raccoon, getting distracted.
Oh.
Yes, Pam. Okay. So yeah, we put in some resources just to remember we're not thinking of these as debates so much as conversations where we're really trying to listen and know that our listening is often what helps bring people along. So Pam, is there anything you want to add?
No, I think you did great explaining that, and just when we practice, yeah, we can just feel more confident, and we really want to have this conversation with as many people as we can. So think about that, and we also want to target the people who we think may be as Heather described earlier, like folks who are with us, but don't get it, don't, and really like call them in, and the listening and not coming at it as a debate, I think is important. I put in the chat the guide, and yeah, I think just taking turns, decide in the group who you think, who wants to practice and have the others, and then having a chance to say what worked well. And then at the end, we'll come back and talk about strategies that worked so that we can all feel confident.
Great. Thank you, Julie and Pam. So I'm going to try to create the breakout rooms now. For the folks who are at Joy's, do you all essentially have a group and I should just leave you on your own?
I think so. I think we're
Okay.
like 2 breakout rooms on our own, probably.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
Thank you.
Got it. Okay, let me try to create this now. Give me one moment.
Okay.
And maybe while you're doing that, just like Julia and I are, like we're here as peers, you know, together with y'all. So the idea of doing this and then afterwards sharing, but this is to, yeah, to just pump us all up and make it real. practicing so that we can, you know, be at it. And there's really no time to waste because we can't let this go without doing everything we can to stop it.
Great. Okay, I'm gonna open our rooms